I happen to race an Oldsmobile. I've raced Oldsmobiles for years. You know, it's kind of a good thing because it forced me to learn, because you just couldn't go out and buy a part. But we do a lot of different other engines. You know, we do big block Chevrolets, big block Fords, small block Fords. I mean, I could sit here and name them all off, but we've physically worked on all of them and done very well with them. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, an engine is an engine, a cylinder head is a cylinder head. It doesn't really know that it's a Pontiac or a Ford. You know, it all has rocker arms, it all has rods and pistons and ports. So if you look at an engine like that, you'll never get tripped up over anything. You know, you kind of all do the same things on all of these engines, and they all perform in the same way. Everything should screw in there nice and freely, and you just put it, you bottom them out finger tight, and just back it off just a hair. You're not looking to induce any stress anywhere by having a thread bind or anything like that. So you just basically screw them with your fingers until they bottom out, and back them off just a little bit. Even though you're screwing these in finger tight, the clamping force is all on the nut and the hardened steel chromoly thread of this fastener. Basically, when you put your main caps on and you tighten your nut, it will basically stretch the fastener. And what they do is they tell you to, the torque specs that come from ARP are for 75% of the fastener's yield point. And what that does is it allows the stud to stretch like a rubber band, basically. And when things heat and they grow, it'll allow it to stretch more but not get past its yield point. Its yield point is the point on where the fastener or the metal will stretch, but it will not return to its original state. So at 75%, it gives you some room for expansion. Okay, these factory caps are numbered from the factory. There's actually a little 1 right there. The second one, there's actually a number 2, and so on down the line. Okay, so you really can't mix them up if you know that little tidbit of information. Secondly, the studs in the block, although at a glance they look like they're centered, but they're actually offset, I think about 100 thousandths if I'm not mistaken. So you physically cannot put the cap on the wrong way. It just won't go on. So you really don't have a chance of messing up there. So I'll put my oil on the bearing, and I'll also put oil on the sides because that's actually press fit into the block. You don't want to gall anything. Also, another tidbit is the little tangs that locate the bearing. They're all on the same side, so I know that when I go in there to set this cap on, I'm going to set it on this way, although if I did put it on the opposite way, it wouldn't go on. You know, another thing with the oil is when you prime the engine, you're going to blast it with oil anyway, so I don't know that I, see a reason that you need any exotic lubricant in there. You know, you put your lubricant in there, you prime the motor, you're going to wash it all out anyway, so. We're going to put this rear cap on with no rear main seal so that we can verify that the crank spins free. You know, I get this question all the time. What do I torque the fastener to? Well, the lubricant that you use drastically affects the torque rating of the fastener, meaning if you did it dry, you would have to torque this thing a whole lot higher than if you had the best lubricant in the world to not allow that friction of the threads and of the mating surface where the nut will hit. So ARP gives you torque specs with Moly, and Moly's a good lubricant for that type of situation. They've already kind of done the homework for you, so it's best just to stick with what they tell you. So I'll take a little Moly here, and every single surface where there's going to be a friction point, you absolutely have to have Moly on that. Now again, you can use oil, and they do give you a spec for oil. You'll just have to torque it higher, but the bolt will stretch in the same fashion. But you'll definitely get a more accurate reading when you torque with moly or a lubricant that is very slippery and gets rid of all those friction points. Okay, we're going to torque the center main first because that has the thrust surface on it. And what you do there is tighten this down until it's just snug. These registers basically hold the main cap from doing this. It cannot go anywhere side to side, but it can slide front and back. So you just tighten it gently and let the crank set that thrust surface, and then you can do the final torque on it. Okay, we've seated it. Now I'll back that off. Okay, now I tighten it back with my fingers. The cap cannot come up, it cannot go this way, it cannot go this way. It can only go this way and this way. Okay, now we get to beat on our crankshaft with a hammer. Okay, we've brought it back, but all of the thrust force will be on the back side. So now we go this way and rotate it as we give it a couple taps. You watch how that freed right up. Okay, the crankshaft pushed this cap in line with the lower piece. It can't go any farther because the lower piece prevented it from doing so. So now we know they're perfectly lined up and I can torque it. You want to go a little at a time on each side and then go right to torque. Okay, now I can torque the rest. And if there's no bind anywhere, this crank should turn like it's on roller bearings. Make sure that there's plenty of moly on each side of the washer. Anywhere where there's a potential friction point, you need moly on it. And again, don't stress out if you don't have the moly. Just follow the manufacturer's recommendation for oil, that's all. You know, if you put, I think they recommend 30 weight oil for the higher torque value. You can't put straight 50 weight oil. That will change the value. So you have to do exactly what the manufacturer recommends. If your torque value is too low, it'll click right away. You're not stretching the bolt. However, if your torque setting on your torque wrench is too high, for whatever reason, whether the torque wrench is inaccurate or you have the wrong setting because maybe you made a mistake or whatever, somebody gave you bad advice, what will happen is you'll turn this thing and you'll turn it and you'll turn it and you'll turn it and it won't click, and you keep turning. What you're doing is you're stretching the bolt, and if you keep going, you'll get past the yield point and you've destroyed the fastener. So you have to kind of pay attention. Basically, I use this phrase very often. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So stop, back it off, figure out what's going on. That feels, it just feels right. You know, I've done this a few times. Okay, now, let's see if our crank spins. See that? That's the way a crank should spin in a block. Not a whole lot of friction going on right there. Now, unfortunately, we have to disassemble the whole thing, put our rear main seal in. But at least we verified that the crankshaft spins properly.